How could a single house nearly become its own financial catastrophe? On Christmas Eve, 1995, America's wealthiest family unveiled a mansion so vast it was called impossible. 178,000 square feet carved out of the Blue Ridge Mountains, designed not just to impress, but to outlast history itself. The world marveled at its beauty, but beneath every gilded surface lay invisible labor, staggering costs, and a burden that threatened to ruin even a Vanderbilt. How could a single house nearly become its own financial catastrophe? The answer begins on a night of wonder, but the true story is far darker than most guests ever suspected. A wave of carriages and lantern-lit coaches wound up the mountain road, their passengers straining for a first glimpse of something rumored to be impossible. The gates opened, and guests stepped into a world that defied even the wildest expectations. Biltmore House, rising from the mist, its limestone facade stretching nearly 800 feet across the hillside. Inside, the air shimmered with the scent of pine and waxed floors, the echo of footsteps swallowed by soaring ceilings and carved stone arches. Christmas Eve, 1995, and every detail seemed chosen to overwhelm. A banquet hall 3 stories tall, a chandelier ablaze with 72 electric bulbs, and a tree that brushed the rafters, its branches heavy with imported ornaments. Rooms unfolded one after another, over 250 in all, each more extravagant than the last. Velvet drapes, tapestries from Europe, and a library built to house 10,000 books. Guests wandered through endless corridors, pausing at marble fireplaces and balconies that opened to the Blue Ridges beyond. Outside, the estate stretched for miles, 125,000 acres of rolling forest and farmland, the mountains silhouetted against the winter sky. No private home in America had ever reached this scale. 178,926 square feet, a chateau carved out of wilderness. On that night, the house was a marvel, a gathering place for writers, artists, and the curious elite. Yet even as laughter and music drifted through the halls, few could imagine what it truly cost to conjure such a spectacle from stone and ambition. George Washington. Vanderbilt II spent years searching for the right model for his retreat, but his vision always circled back to the chateau of the French Loire Valley. He returned from his travels with sketches of spiral staircases, towers, and steep slate roofs, details borrowed from places like Chambord and Chenonceau. Vanderbilt was not just another Gilded Age heir. He read philosophy in several languages, collected rare books, and kept notebooks filled with ideas about art and architecture. He wanted Biltmore to be a place where beauty and intellect lived side by side, a private world that rivaled the grandeur of Europe's old estates. To bring these ambitions to life, Vanderbilt turned to Richard Morris Hunt, the first American to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Hunt's training shaped every inch of the design, from the carved limestone facade to the grand stair tower that spirals up 4 stories. Each element was chosen to evoke the Renaissance splendor Vanderbilt admired abroad. Hunt's blueprints called for a house on a scale Americans had never attempted, a chateau in the wilderness built not just for comfort, but for awe. Outside, Frederick Law Olmsted, best known for Central Park, faced a different challenge, taming 125,000 acres of rough Carolina land into a landscape that matched the house's ambition. Olmsted envisioned winding roads, terraced gardens, and forests managed with scientific precision. The estate would be more than just a setting. It would be a living experiment in beauty and utility. Together, Hunt and Olmsted transformed Vanderbilt's personal taste into a blueprint for something that demanded far more than ordinary craftsmanship. The result was a project so massive it would soon require industrial-scale labor and logistics on a scale rarely seen in private construction. Between 1889 and 1895, the quiet valleys below Asheville thundered with the sounds of construction. Biltmore's creation demanded more than vision. It required an industrial supply chain that rivaled small cities. At the heart of this machine, a 3-mile private rail spur snaked up the mountain, bringing in carloads of Indiana limestone, bricks, slate, and timber day after day. The estate's own brick kiln fired millions of bricks on site, while a dedicated woodworking factory turned out custom doors, paneling, and intricate trim. At the project's peak, over 1,000 men worked in shifts, their labor stretching from dawn until darkness, laying stone, hoisting beams, and feeding the endless appetite of a house that seemed to grow by the hour. Stonemasons shaped blocks for the grand facade, while teams of carpenters framed the soaring ceilings and spiral staircases. Steam-powered derricks lifted massive stones into place, and horse-drawn carts rumbled along muddy tracks, ferrying supplies from the railhead to the rising mansion. The logistics alone were staggering. Every window, every tile, every length of copper pipe had to be ordered, shipped, and installed with precision. Mistakes meant costly delays, and the pressure to meet Vanderbilt's Christmas deadline pushed men and machines to their limits. While the world marveled at Biltmore's grandeur, the true scale of the operation unfolded behind the scenes. The estate became a living engine of industry, humming with the energy of 1,000 hands and the relentless movement of materials. Yet for all its visible splendor, much of the work, and the workers themselves, remained hidden from view, their efforts absorbed into the walls and foundations of America's most ambitious home. Beneath the marble floors and velvet drapes, another world kept Biltmore alive. 80 to 100 staff moved through a maze of concealed corridors, their footsteps muffled behind thick walls. Servant staircases twisted up from the basement, allowing housemaids and butlers to vanish from view before guests ever glimpsed a uniform. The estate's design demanded that labor remain invisible, an entire workforce orchestrated to operate in silence, out of sight. In the kitchens, cooks and scullery maids began their day before sunrise, preparing meals for dozens, sometimes hundreds, without ever setting foot in the grand dining room. The laundry room steamed from dawn to dusk, water boiling in massive copper vats as linens cycled through endless rounds of washing and pressing. Below the house, boiler rooms thundered with the constant churn of coal, feeding heat and electricity through a labyrinth of pipes that spread warmth to every corner. Staff routines followed a clockwork rhythm. Housemaids cleaned and dusted before guests awoke, while footmen polished silver and tended to fireplaces, 65 in all, each one requiring fresh wood and ash removal daily. The call box system buzzed with requests, summoning workers to the farthest reaches of the house at a moment's notice. Even at night, watchmen patrolled the corridors, ensuring the estate's pulse never faltered. For the staff, Biltmore was less a palace than a machine that demanded constant attention. Their labor, hidden by design, was the true engine behind every dazzling event and quiet morning. But every paycheck, every meal served, carried a cost that would soon haunt even the Vanderbilt fortune. Invoices stacked up in the Biltmore office, each one a fresh reminder that beauty came with a price. The final construction. Bill landed between $5 and $6 million, an amount so large for the time that even the Vanderbilt fortune felt its weight. Adjusted for modern dollars, the sum hovers near $180 million, a figure that could bankroll a city's skyline. But the spending didn't stop when the last stone was set. Keeping the estate alive demanded an annual outlay of at least $250,000, or nearly $7 million today. Payroll for 100 staff, coal for the boilers, repairs for elevators and refrigeration, endless linens, and food for a house that never truly slept. The costs rolled in month after month with no finish line in sight. Private ledgers from the period tell a story of mounting anxiety. George Vanderbilt wrote of endless bills, a phrase that crept into his correspondence as the estate's appetite grew. The numbers were relentless. 65 fireplaces to be cleaned and fueled, 43 bathrooms to be scrubbed, gardens and farms to be managed across 125,000 acres. Every modern convenience, electricity, telephones, elevators, came with a maintenance contract and a new set of problems when something broke. The estate's own factories and farms were meant to offset expenses, but profits never matched the vision. The math grew darker each year, as bills for luxury outpaced the income from forestry, agriculture, and craft industries. The Vanderbilt name had once seemed unbreakable, but Biltmore's financial reality was a slow tightening. What began as a monument to possibility became a ledger of obligations, each line item a reminder that even the grandest dreams could be haunted by their own ambition. The house stood as proof that scale alone could become its own kind of threat, a silent pressure building behind every locked office door. In 1913, a new federal income tax swept across the country, targeting fortunes that once seemed untouchable. For Biltmore, the timing could not have been worse. The estate's vast holdings, already expensive to maintain, now faced a permanent drain as tax bills landed alongside the never-ending invoices for coal, staff, and repairs. The following year, George Vanderbilt died unexpectedly at age 51. The shock left his wife, Edith, facing a mountain of debt and a house whose beauty now felt like a burden. Edith Vanderbilt stepped into a role she never wanted, forced to make decisions that would reshape the estate forever. She negotiated the sale of nearly 87,000 acres, more than two-thirds of the land, to the federal government. The deal, finalized in 1916, created Pisgah National Forest, preserving the mountains that had drawn George there in the first place. The sale brought in much-needed cash, but stripped the estate down to its core. Farms, industries, and even part of the village that had once supported Biltmore were sold off in the years that followed, each transaction shrinking the dream to something barely sustainable. The blows kept coming. Floods, economic downturns, and the relentless pressure of taxes pushed the estate closer to collapse. By the late 1920s, the family's options had narrowed to a single desperate measure. In March 1930, as the Great Depression gripped Asheville, Edith's daughter Cornelia and her husband John Cecil opened Biltmore House to the public. For $1, anyone could walk through the doors that once guarded America's grandest private home. The velvet ropes and guided tours were a stark reversal of everything George Vanderbilt had imagined. Yet for Edith, survival meant sacrifice. Each visitor brought in a few more dollars to keep the lights on, the staff paid, and the house from being lost forever. The impossible house had become a public curiosity, its secrets now on display for the price of a ticket. In the end, endurance depended not on wealth, but on the willingness to let go of what once seemed untouchable. George Vanderbilt's ambitions for Biltmore stretched far beyond architecture. On the hills and valleys surrounding the house, he set out to build a working estate, one that could sustain itself through science and careful management. The land, once stripped by logging and farming, became a laboratory for American forestry. In 1892, Frederick Law Olmsted brought in a young forester named Gifford Pinchot. Pinchot's charge was simple in theory, but radical in practice. Restore the forests, harvest timber without destroying the land, and turn the estate's 125,000 acres into a model of profitable conservation. His methods balanced selective cutting with replanting, tracking every acre's yield and health. For the first time in the United States, a private landowner treated forestry as both business and stewardship. Pinchot's work drew national attention. When he left to become the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, Dr. Carl Schenck took his place. Schenck founded the Biltmore Forest School in 1898, the first of its kind in America, training more than 300 students in sustainable forestry over the next 15 years. The estate's farms, meanwhile, produced everything from potatoes and corn to sheep and dairy, supplying both the house and the local market. Every field, barn, and managed forest represented an experiment in self-sufficiency, an attempt to make the estate's grandeur pay its own way. But as the bills for staff and maintenance mounted, even these scientific ventures strained to keep up with the demands of the mansion on the hill. Biltmore's scale was matched only by its appetite for innovation. In 1995, few American homes could claim indoor plumbing in every bedroom, let alone 43 bathrooms and 65 fireplaces, each one vented through a maze of flues hidden in the walls. The mansion's electrical system ran on direct current, with wiring threaded behind ornate paneling and chandeliers that could flicker to life at the touch of a button. 2 elevators, powered by their own generators, carried guests and staff between 4 sprawling floors, a luxury more common in city hotels than private country homes. Central heating sent warmth through cast-iron radiators, while an intricate refrigeration system kept food fresh in the kitchen's walk-in coolers. Call boxes and telephones connected every wing, allowing orders and requests to travel silently through the house's veins. Leisure took on a new meaning. A heated indoor swimming pool, a bowling alley, and a gymnasium waited in the basement, their tiled halls echoing with the footsteps of guests who had never seen such amenities outside a grand hotel. The library, designed to hold 10,000 volumes, was wired for electric reading lamps long before most Americans had light bulbs in their homes. Every system, every convenience, demanded constant attention and repair. The promise of modern comfort came at a staggering cost, not just in dollars, but in the endless labor required to keep the lights on and the water hot. Biltmore's technology dazzled, but beneath the surface, it bound the estate to a future where maintenance was as relentless as the ambition that built it. In the dark years of World War II, Biltmore's vast halls took on a new purpose. Between 1942 and 1944, the estate became a hidden vault for some of the nation's most precious treasures. The National Gallery of Art, fearing attacks on Washington, quietly shipped dozens of masterpieces, including works by Rembrandt and Raphael, down winding mountain roads to the secure, climate-controlled rooms deep within Biltmore's stone walls. Armed guards patrolled the grounds. Only a handful of staff knew what was locked away behind heavy doors, and the secret held until the war's end. Not a single piece was lost or damaged. After the war, Biltmore's survival depended on reinvention. The estate's doors, once opened out of desperation during the Depression, became the gateway to a new kind of prosperity. By the late 20th century, the Biltmore Company had transformed the property into a thriving business. Tourism became the lifeblood of the estate, drawing more than 1 million visitors each year. Hotels, a winery, and special exhibitions filled the grounds with new energy, turning the old mansion into a living enterprise. What began as a private refuge for one family now stands as a monument to endurance, its future secured not by secrecy or solitude, but by welcoming the world inside. Biltmore still stands, but its survival proves that beauty alone never pays the bills. Reinvention does. Today, nearly 2 million Americans work in the tourism industry, where yesterday's excess becomes tomorrow's escape. The line between legacy and liability remains razor-thin. Every grand vision leaves a footprint only the future can judge.